Thank you everyone for joining the Minnesota HIMSS webinar on innovation and human-centered design, presented by Ryan Armbruster. We will be recording this event and making this available to all of our Minnesota HIMSS members. If you would like to be a speaker or sponsor for a future webinar event, please reach out to us via our webpage, mn.himsschapter.org. We will do a Q&A at the end of the event. If you have a question that you would like answered, please type those in the question section of GoToWebinar, and we will read those at the end of the presentation. I am pleased to introduce our speaker today, Ryan. Ryan currently oversees the Executive Healthcare Education programs at the University of Minnesota, where he also has designed and taught healthcare innovation and service design courses for the past 14 years. His recent work includes various roles at UnitedHealth Group, where he architected and implemented numerous innovations and capabilities, including Optum's Service Design Studio. He is currently an advisor with Optum Advisory Services. He is a recognized pioneer and leader of human-centered service design and innovation, and his award-winning designs have made a significant impact in the healthcare industry. Prior to Optum, Ryan created and directed the Spark Design Lab at Mayo Clinic, a groundbreaking center for innovation in healthcare services. Ryan received the inaugural Alumni Innovator Award from the University of Minnesota in 2014, and he provides invited talks at forums around the world on the topic of making healthcare work better for people. Thank you, Ryan, for presenting with us today.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, and thanks for everyone for joining today. It's my pleasure to spend a little time with you here over our lunch hour and talk about my favorite topic, which is innovation and human-centered design. As Rebecca mentioned, I spent the past 20 years in the industry, and I had the fortunate opportunity to spend nearly 100% of my time for that past 20 years solely focused in doing work related to healthcare innovation. So I've had this great opportunity to learn a lot and gain a lot of experience on helping healthcare organizations innovate more effectively. In addition, teaching for, going on 14 years now, our graduate students and executive students about healthcare innovation also helps keep me fresh in continuing to learn about innovation in healthcare, effective methods, and how organizations are getting better at being more effective at innovation. So my focus for today's talk is to share with you a few things related to that accumulated experience, both in the field, but also in teaching. Some of the ideas, concepts, and frameworks that I found most useful to professionals when thinking about healthcare innovation. First, I want to briefly go through some innovation fundamentals just to make sure we're all on the same page about innovation and what we're talking about when we say innovation. Second, I'll talk about human-centered design methods, what they are, how they work, what are the fundamental concepts there. And then lastly, I want to wrap that all up and talk about, okay, well, how does innovation and human-centered design work within organizations or not work sometimes, and what are some of the key capabilities and strategies to make healthcare organizations more effective at both of those concepts. First, let's talk about innovation, and I'll go through this kind of fundamental material at a pretty quick pace here, just because I think it's pretty straightforward, but serves to get us all on the same page. So I think a good definition of innovation is something new that creates value. I try to narrow it down to some of the simplest terms here. There's a lot of different ways to talk about it, but to me, one of the more simple and straightforward ways is to talk about something new that creates value. There's a little bit of nuance though in some of these words, and so I want to point that out. First being the word something, okay? That something can really be just about anything as long as it's new and creates value. And sometimes we think about the hard things, not the difficult things, but the tangible things. such as products and objects and new devices, but it can also be new services, new experiences, and a variety of other types of new things. I think this is important because as we all work in a services industry, oftentimes the innovation that we can produce within healthcare is more intangible. It falls in the realm of new business models, new services and experiences, and I'll touch on a few of those as examples later in the presentation. Second word that I want to call out is the word new. Now, some people may think that to be an innovation, it has to be something that's never been thought of before. It's brand new to the world. Unfortunately, brand new things to the world don't come around very often. Sometimes, mostly, they're recombinations of existing ideas or existing concepts. And there's different levels of what may be new. There's new at the sustaining level, which is something a little different than what we already do today. I put continuous improvement and efforts like that in the bucket of sustaining innovation. They're things that make our, our current processes create a little more value. So I am doing something new and it's creating more value. Incremental is one step beyond that. I think the best way to think about incremental innovation is version 2.0 of an existing product or service or device. And so you can think about versions of the iPhone. I consider those incremental innovations. They're somewhat similar to what already existed, but yet they add new features and new value propositions onto that existing product. And then last, and probably the one I'll think about the most when it comes to innovation, is breakthrough. And that's the stuff that, is substantially different than what exists today, and really sometimes is disruptive. We can talk about that a little bit as well. But those are the ones that really create a lot of value just in themselves. So there's different levels of new. And the other aspect of new that I want to point out is, it has to be new in context. If I go over to Europe and I observe some healthcare organizations who are doing something that no other, institution is doing in the United States, and I bring that new concept back to the United States and introduce it and build it and deliver it, would that be considered innovation? In my definition, yes, that would, because it's new to the organization and to your customers. So it's creating new value for them. And lastly, value. This is an essential element of innovation. This is the piece that differentiates innovation from creativity, okay? So you can create new things, that's great, but unless they generate some type of value, either for organizations or for customers, we can't consider those innovation. And that value goes beyond just simply producing monetary value. That value can be measured in numerous different ways. And oftentimes the best way to measure it is from the perspective of your customers. How does this create value for them? What is that value? Is it a better experience? Is it greater confidence? Is it deeper trust, better relationship? So there's a lot of ways to measure the value. And obviously you want to, as an organization, translate that value into revenue or lower costs, but you have to think about both sides of that value equation. Another way of looking at the sustaining, incremental, and breakthrough is on a 2x2 matrix like this, where you have high alignment with your current business, which I talked about earlier, and low alignment, which is very different than what you do today. And on the vertical axis, you have, it's not very different from competitors, or it's not something that can't be repeated or copied very easily by competitors, up to the top where, hey, if we do this, it's really going to set us apart from the competition, and it's going to be maybe a couple of years or maybe even more before our competitors really are able to model and do what we do. Sustaining in the lower left corner, obviously, you have incremental somewhere in the middle, and then the breakthrough way up at the top. The point I do want to make with this slide, though, is the size of these circles. Sustaining an incremental innovation, because there's a lot more of it, creates a lot more cumulative value than the breakthrough innovation. I think sometimes we're misled to believe that unless it's a breakthrough innovation, it's not really, generating big value. Now, each one of those breakthrough things do create a remarkable amount of value, but the fact is that the breakthrough type of innovation doesn't come along very often, not nearly as much as incremental and sustaining. From an organizational perspective, you want a balanced portfolio, because you can imagine if you're only going after breakthrough ideas and you don't hit that mark very often, it's pretty hard to keep innovation efforts sustainable within companies. Last framework around innovation before we move on to design is categories of innovation. So a large consulting firm does an annual analysis where they profile companies around the world and across industries in terms of how they're going about innovation. And they found that there's 3 categories of innovation that everybody, is focused on or does. Okay, one is market-based innovation. This is the type of innovation that is driven by changing market dynamics. Depending on the market, that could be competitor moves, it could be consolidation, but it also in some markets, it could mean government policy, government regulations change, and then drive changes within the industry. In our healthcare industry, market-based innovation is probably the area that we spend the most resources and energy on in the industry by necessity. Some of the Affordable Care Act, for example, when that was introduced, that drove more spending on innovation probably than anything had in a long time. And you may be able to think of the implications for the IT requirements associated with that, or other, regulations that drive IT changes as well. Massive amounts of spending, massive amount of resources go into innovating related to the market in the United States. Second category is technology-based innovation. This is probably even a more obvious one. It's innovation that's driven by advancements in technology. So it's not necessarily the introduction of new capabilities in technology. It's probably more often the reduced cost of technology. So as costs come down in technology and that makes that technology more accessible, you can start to use that technology in a variety of different ways. Think about a LED screen technology. As the costs continue to come down, now you can take those LED screens and use them for a whole bunch of different purposes that you just couldn't afford to use before. So all of a sudden you see them in cars, and you see that you're starting to see them in a whole bunch of different places, on refrigerators, and a whole bunch of different places. That drives a lot of innovation, that the cost curve there. Last category of innovation is something called needs-based innovation. Different than the first two, because what actually drives the innovation here is changing needs of customers. Okay, so the needs of our customers change, and now we need to address those needs, or respond to those needs, or meet those needs. So therefore, we're going to invest resources and create new things that meet those changing needs. Point I want to make about this slide: they also profiled every company based on what % of innovation they do in each. Now, every company does a little bit in every category if they're innovating. They do some in market, they do some technology-based innovation, they do needs-based innovation. The point here is that the companies that had more of their resources invested in needs-based innovation were also more successful overall compared to peers within the industry. Year after year, they show that investing in needs-based innovation drives greater value for those organizations, both measured in terms of customers, but also in terms of that company and their growth. That is the lead-in to our conversation about design. And for those of you who are maybe fluent in design, you're probably aware that design is a method to do or perform needs-based innovation. And more specifically, human-centered design is dialed in specifically to understanding people's needs and then delivering and coming up with solutions that are specifically designed to meet those needs. So human-centered design is not necessarily a discipline of design, it's more of an approach to innovation. Human-centered design can influence into all different types of fields of design. You can use it in UX design, UI design and product design and all the different fields of design, you can use human-centered design to supplement those disciplines to drive greater centricity around people's needs. One specifically I want to talk about is also some familiarity here around service design. So service design is actually a design discipline that optimizes how customers and businesses interact in the services arena. Okay, so service design is a recognized field of design. There's, I think, 132 formally recognized fields of design: UX design and product design and industrial design, and you can go on and on and on. There's 135 of them. Service design is one of those, okay? In service design, again, as mentioned earlier, healthcare services is predominantly what we do as an industry. It makes sense that we would be using service design to help improve and design those services. Essentially what it is people at the center and 6 components of services built around it. People and process at the top, and then props, technology, content or information, the physical space, sometimes but not always, and sometimes but not always there's a physical product. Probably what's overlooked is the people in the process, and the fact that we can design people and process. To clarify, we're not, producing designer babies by any means. The people part of it is, if you think about it, okay, well, in the healthcare services, obviously the people are one of the biggest components of healthcare services, nurses and doctors and all sorts of clinical professionals. We frame up, okay, well, what is that job description? What are the things that they do? I script, language for call center agents. I design the entire architecture of who those people are and what those people do to deliver that service. And sometimes as designers, we overlook that opportunity. Those are all design decisions, and using that as a way to create a better service is a phenomenal opportunity to improve and innovate healthcare services. Human-centered design is an approach to innovation, as I mentioned earlier, and I think this model, speaks to that very well. This will ultimately be a Venn diagram here, where at the center of this Venn is a very good, innovative, sustainable idea that creates value. The 2 logical things we attempt to figure out when trying to get to that innovative idea is it feasible? Can we actually do that? Do we have the technical and operational capabilities to actually build this thing and make it happen? And then viability is, well, can we sustain it? Is it profitable, or is it, sustainable from a revenue and financial perspective? Those 2 things are oftentimes where we start, because we think that, well, man, if we can't deliver it, from a feasible standpoint, then why waste our time? Let's rule that out and go searching for something that is more feasible. And in that process, here's what we overlook a lot of times is the desirability component. That is, well, what do people need? And is this actually going to be interesting and useful to them? Now, when I say that, you say, well, that's pretty important, because if it doesn't work for people and they don't want it, it doesn't matter if it's feasible and viable, it's not going to work in the long run. And human-centered design says, let's not just figure that out as one of the 3. Let's actually start with that. Let's start with what are people's needs, so that then we can use that as a foundation of figuring out what to build. And we can actually then build something with the criteria around feasibility that make that a feasible and viable offering. There's a lot of different ways to talk about a human-centered design process. This is probably one of the most simple ways to do that. This is a framework by IDO, a leading design firm consultancy. This is how they talk about it, one of their toolkits. It's not necessarily the best or the worst. It's just one way of talking about it, which I find it's really simple. You start with inspiration, which is learning from people and empathizing with people. You use that information to build your ideas and create ideas and solutions. And then you prototype and use design methods to figure out how to bring that to life, and ultimately move it towards implementation. The front end of that process is where, you know, a lot of the nuance of the design methods and a lot of the quality of the design work really happens. So if I took that front part of inspiration to ideation, this is a great way to break that apart. And I want to step through this just kind of one by one, because I think it's a one-step granular view of how a design process should work. The first is the learnings up front. This is where everything starts. As I mentioned earlier, getting empathy for your customers. We've all heard the walk a mile in your customer's shoes. We've all heard it, but very rarely do professionals do the work of walking that mile in our customers' shoes. And that's one of the biggest opportunities with design, is not necessarily rolling up your sleeves and doing ideation and those types of things. It's actually figuring out, well, how am I going to walk that mile in my customer's shoes to really get an empathetic understanding of their needs and how the world looks from their point of view. I'm just going to give you an example here that, you know, if you look at a picture like this, I ask, okay, well, what does this person need? You know, and what are the ways that we could help this person, you know, by meeting their needs? And if you look at this picture, you may come up with a handful of different things that this person needs. They need gloves, maybe they need water, they need better shoes, they need a better instrument to work that field. They need an instrument that helps them stand up straighter so they don't hurt their back. There's some obvious things that stand out, but then there's also some non-obvious things. This person needs water. This person needs water for their food, that is, or field, that is. They need food. They need sustenance. They need a way of life. So there's some other kind of non-obvious needs as well. So I mean, just in that brainstorm, there was 10 different things that this person may need, and you may be able to think of 10 more. Which one is right? The point is that we don't really know for sure, right? Because when we just look at things and observe things, we don't necessarily have that deep, we don't have this empathetic understanding of this individual. We're just looking at them and making, you know, assumptions or presumptions about what their needs are. And that's actually what happens most of the time in businesses. We may not look at a picture, but maybe we look at data. We look at customer survey feedback. And based on all, those are not answers. We still need to make the same assumptions then about their needs based on that data. And human-centered design says we got to go one step deeper. We got to really understand what those needs are. This is one of the most important frameworks related to design that I've come across in 20 years, and I wanted to share it with you because I think it really demonstrates, okay, well, how do design methods help us get that deeper understanding, okay? And the way it breaks it down is structures needs in terms of explicit needs, tacit needs, and latent needs of our customers, all right? And the explicit needs are the things that customers can tell us, and they do. The tacit needs are needs that our customers have that they could tell us, but oftentimes they don't tell us for one reason or another. And latent needs are needs that people have that they don't even know that they have today. You can think about those needs as, you say, that sounds really weird, but I bet I can relate it to an experience that you might have had. It's the last time you came across a new product or service and your reaction was, oh my gosh, how did I live my life without this thing? Or you say, why didn't I think of this? You know, those are signs of new products or new services that really hit a latent need that you really didn't know you had before you had it, but now that you have it, you can imagine living your life without it. So 3 levels of needs, how do you get at those? Well, the explicit needs is pretty obvious. You ask people, they tell you. That's all explicit information. And our asking methods are, we interview people, we survey people a lot in healthcare, we'll do focus groups with people, we'll ask them a bunch of questions and they'll give us answers. That's oftentimes where we stop in healthcare. Many organizations stop at just using explicit information to make decisions about strategies and innovation opportunities. It's not that that information is wrong, it can be super helpful information, but only basing decisions on explicit information can sometimes lead you in the wrong direction. That's why getting to tacit information is helpful. Remember, this is the information that people don't necessarily tell you, but you can learn about and they can express, but you have to go deeper. And the best way to do that is to spend time in their shoes, is to watch them, maybe not watch them. Oftentimes shadowing and living the life of a nurse for a day is a great way to get at this. But sometimes you can also, observe it from through their perspective as well. So asking questions differently, asking them to tell you stories about how they do things, asking them to show you things rather than simply tell you things, are all ways to get a deeper understanding of their needs, and oftentimes ask better questions about where there's opportunities. The last is latent categories. You might imagine if we could produce things that elicit that, oh my gosh, how did I live my life without this thing? That would be pretty phenomenal if we were able to generate innovations in this way. The only way to really get some preliminary insights about whether a latent need exists or not is to actually build things and create things. And that's where prototyping, one of the fundamental design skills, plays a hugely important role. It's not until you actually bring something to life in maybe some small, low fidelity way that customers can actually put it into some sort of context for them and give you an understanding of whether it's going to create that value for them or not. Imagine 20 years ago if I sat you down at a table in a conference room and I described for you what an iPhone is. Now today you'd say, oh my gosh, well, I totally get it. But if you put yourself in the shoes of living 20 years ago and someone described an iPhone for you, I can almost guarantee your reaction would have been, hey, that sounds pretty cool, but this phone that I got right here works just fine. And it is, as crazy as it sounds that you might have reacted that way, I would guess that that's probably the way you would have reacted. And it's because it's so foreign, it's so different than what the world looks like for you today that you really can't, produce a solid, reliable value, relation for how that thing may work. So that's the value of prototyping. Bringing things to life, putting it in the context for people helps you reveal those insights and possibly lead you to latent opportunities. All right, I want to jump back. So that was all around kind of learning, but going to themes, and then I'd say the next important part here is insights. And I've worked on 100 different design projects in healthcare for organizations, different types of organizations. And there's one consistent theme about the design projects that were really good. They all involved some type of insight that changed how either we or ultimately the organization thought about the problem, the opportunity, and totally influenced where that project headed and the solution that resulted from it. So, and it's hard to generate insights. It's not easy, but when you do the work and you do it well, you're more likely to generate those insights. And that's why a really good learning process and skilled practitioners can get you to those insights in a more reliable way. These insights really, as I mentioned earlier, change how you think about the problem and ultimately get you to even better and more remarkable solutions. Lastly, the whole process, you guys are familiar with working visually, I'm sure, and you may have seen people working in this way. Working in a visual manner is a critically important part of a good design process, and design teams will work in, project rooms and use a lot of visual methods to do thematic analysis and opportunity identification out of mostly qualitative learning research. It's different than how we work today. I won't spend a lot of time here, but the traditional management or business approach, to thinking and managing is very different than an innovative and design approach. It's not that one is right or wrong. They need to coexist in organizations, and figuring that out, navigating that is critically important to unlocking good innovation and design. I want to show you a few methods and examples. I'll continue to work through this at a fairly quick pace here. Field learning, getting out in the field and learning about people as individuals, and taking that individual knowledge and bringing it back for an organization to work with in a way to identify themes and put together insights is critically important. Oftentimes it's not interviewing people. Remember, we want to really empathize with them and understand how the world looks from their point of view. So oftentimes learning about people is spending time with them and engaging them in conversations and activities. And here's a bunch of examples here, and you can see the writing and the work, the exercises, the activities that we use when working with customers to help really get a better sense for their values, their behaviors, their attitudes, their beliefs, all things that are probably one level deeper than, the stuff they may tell you about or just say naturally. Another important aspect of the design process is around mapping. So how do I bring things to life visually? Because, visuals can really express a lot of information in one way, but also show you how information relates to other pieces of information. And putting together pieces of information in different ways is a great way to get to insights. So if you can produce these visuals and maps for others and engage them in the process, it's even more likely that you're going to generate insights. These are examples of two maps that we generated with UnitedHealth Group on different projects. The one on the left showing a whole wide range of different services and the complexity of how they all need to work in different ways and come together for an individual, believe it or not, at the middle of that large and very complex map. And same as on the right side there, this is a project for the military. And it was actually about behavioral health counseling for the military. And what seemed to be a pretty straightforward project about counselors was really revealed to be a lot more complex because of how many different people need to interact and coordinate with that counselor to deliver on a successful service experience for beneficiaries. And then, you may be familiar with journey maps, and a lot of journey mapping happens in design processes to really represent what this experience looks like from a customer point of view. It's not process mapping. This isn't about the process that your organization delivers. It's about how that is experienced by your customers. This is an example of the United Healthcare project where we were asked to really represent the provider experience with United Healthcare. And there had been a lot of process mapping done before, but all of them, they fell short of really representing, okay, well, what is the actual experience that providers have with United Healthcare in regards to the services and experience they receive? And one of the critical aspects of this journey map that we created was the simple, what seems now like a very simple observation is, insurers refer to their customers as providers, as one of their customers, right? Obviously members are their customers as well, but providers are a big customer, and they refer to that group of customers as providers. But there's actually, when you say providers, there's actually multiple different stakeholders and points of view in those organizations. And the three we decided to represent in this journey map were the physicians themselves, right? When you say providers, obviously you're talking about physicians and other clinical professionals, but also the customers that are being served there are the CEO or the leadership of those organizations, and then the business office is the other function within those provider organizations that are really the customers of the United Healthcare services. So showing a journey map that really represented the empathetic view of those three different personas within those provider organizations really opened up a different perspective and a wealth of new opportunities for United Healthcare. Co-designing, when you get your idea or getting close to your idea or want to generate ideas, co-designing with customers is another great design tool. This is, take some concepts, take some themes, go back out into the field with your customers and engage them around ideating. Don't ask them what ideas would you like us to create? Actually go one level deeper, which is to say, here is some stimulus, for generating ideas. Let's work with this. Let me get your ideas on how we could take this concept and build it into something that would really relate to your organization. A great tool in doing that with customers is to storyboard some preliminary concepts, not only for customers, but also this works really well inside of organizations. This is a preliminary way of prototyping because you're bringing to life, that idea or that new concept so that people can start to get a little context about how this thing would be experienced and how it would play out over time. And the last sample tool or method here is something called blueprinting. It's similar to journey mapping, right? Because a journey map is a flow, through a process or the way an experience plays out over time. The journey map is kind of is one line in this overall blueprint. The blueprint basically starts to build out an experience both at the front of the house, but also at the back of the house. And that's the dividing line here in the middle. I recognize you can't read the details, but the red line across the center of this visual is the dividing line between what happens inside the organization and what is experienced outside of the organization. And these blueprints, you might imagine, get very complex because it starts to outline, okay, detailed, this is operationally how we need to deliver this experience for our customers. And it goes beyond process mapping, right? Because it's even more detailed than that, both front of house and in back of house. This is not one blueprint. This is one page of a process blueprint that I think included 20 pages of how this process played out for customers. Lastly, I want to go one level above just methods and just give you 3 quick project examples from UnitedHealth Group and some of the project work that I did there. The first is over on the left, was one of the first design projects that I launched at UnitedHealth Group. This would have been in 2011. This is a project to make the insurance experience better for people. Okay, I think it's pretty obvious that most insurance members don't like the experience they're provided from their insurance company, and United Healthcare was no different at that time. So we did a design project, all the steps I just talked about. We went out and spent time with members in their homes. We analyzed that information, built themes, and ultimately arrived at a new customer service concept that was much more personal, much more relational. It gave people more time and attention. We piloted that in 2012. It was so successful that UnitedHealth Group within the next year rolled it out to 40 million members across the country, and it became the new customer service model for how people interact with UnitedHealthcare. And what a great way to launch design-oriented capabilities within an organization than, to hit a home run early in the process. So that generated a lot more opportunities to do more design work. Again, numerous projects. One is here in the middle. This was in 2014, I think, or 13. We catalyzed a project around social determinants of health and understanding community assets related to health services. This was a little bit at the, before, maybe even prior to social determinants of health becoming as talked about and as discussed as they are today. We pitched to executives at United Healthcare that we need to be spending more time addressing social determinants and incorporating them into the strategies of United Healthcare. Initially, the response was not positive. They didn't understand how social determinants were things that United Healthcare should be responsible for. So there's actually a little pushback at the beginning of the project. But it took about 6 months, a year, some changes in leadership. One of the executives who really liked the idea moved into the CEO role of the Medicaid business, grabbed a hold of this project work and actually turned it into the My Connections program. Within 2 years, this was responsible for United Healthcare becoming the largest investor of housing of any healthcare organization in the country. Now I think in 2020 they have over $500 million invested in housing for high-need Medicaid members across the country. Lastly, and I won't spend a lot of time on this, but we also use design methods to architect an entire new disruptive business for United Healthcare called Harken Health. It was a mashup of a new insurance company combined with remarkable different type of primary care delivered for people who bought their own insurance. It's a whole story in and of itself, but design methods created something that was truly remarkable and generated ridiculous experience and value for customers. I want to wrap up with just a few minutes about organizational capabilities. Having built design capabilities at Mayo Clinic and multiple areas of UnitedHealth Group, not only just design-based capabilities, but also they became catalysts for their innovation capabilities as well. I just wanted to share some insights about some things that I know have worked for those organizations, and maybe some things to maybe help you continue to advocate for and push more successful innovation in your organization. The first is sometimes the question I hear from healthcare organizations who may not be fluent or as familiar with innovation is, why would I create an innovation department or an innovation group? Because I don't think innovation is something that only a few should be responsible for. I want everybody at my organization to be responsible for innovation. I say, okay, I understand the mental logic there of that argument, but then I also say, do you have a quality department? And most every healthcare, executive will say, of course we have a quality department. Well, don't you think that quality is should be everybody's job at your organization? Well, yes, but yeah, you have a quality department, right? And that's, I think that's a great parallel for innovation. You can't use the argument that, well, I need to, make sure that innovation is everybody's job, and therefore I'm not going to create, an innovation group or innovation department. That logic fails for me. I think innovation needs skilled practitioners who are responsible for supporting, driving, and advocating for innovation across the company or the organization. If you don't have this and you just kind of rely on, well, it's everybody's job, it actually is, becomes nobody's job, and it's very hard to get good quality, sustainable innovation going inside of organizations. This is a framework from Deloitte, and actually, one of the companies they acquired, which is a company called Doblin, which has been a leader in innovation strategy for a long, long time. I found this framework really, really good. I'm not going to spend a ton of time going I just point you to this reference if you're curious on it. I think it covers the exact things that organizations need to have in place to make sure that their innovation efforts are sustainable and successful. You can't imagine how many articles and things I've read over the last 20 years related to innovation. This is the best one that I'd recommend. If you want to know the things that an organization needs to think about to successfully innovate, it is these 4 categories. Innovation strategy tied to your organizational strategy and your approach, the organization and the culture and the support for innovation in the middle, the resources, not just the financial resources, but the skills and competencies, including the practitioners and the tools they use. And then lastly, how are we rewarding it, incentivizing it, and sustaining it at the end. This is almost, I didn't have this framework when I was at UnitedHealth Group, but we actually structured the innovation strategy for UnitedHealth Group very, very similar to these 4 areas. And that really drove UnitedHealth Group's elevation to, the leading innovator within their sector for, I think it's 10 years running now. Another, my way of dialing into the capabilities piece and actually then breaking it out for sustaining, incremental, and breakthrough looks like this. I think a couple of things I'll point out here. You may have employee innovation challenges going on at your company. This is the idea box, or we're going to collect a bunch of ideas and pick ones and drive innovation. It's an interesting strategy. It can create some value. Oftentimes, those things are more sustaining and incremental. And I think a lot of organizations kick those off, hoping to find the breakthrough, things. That's where I think there's a little bit of a misunderstanding there. There's a whole category of open innovation strategies in that upper right box over there that are really more well tuned to achieving some of those breakthrough results. And you're seeing more and more healthcare organizations create and invest in some of those things, hoping to get towards greater open innovation. A quick summary on some of the points we talked about and how to get to sustainable innovation in organizations. First is make sure that any innovation strategy is coupled with the organizational strategy. I've seen organizations create innovation strategies that are like, hey, we're going to go in left field, completely off the radar of what our organization is, thinking about, and try to create something breakthrough over there. Rarely works, and it's oftentimes a huge waste of resources for those organizations who are throwing money away into groups that are trying to do that. An organization that exists and is pursuing a strategy, aligning with that strategy and pointing your innovation efforts towards supporting those is the wisest thing to do. It's enabled by skills and resources. If you're going to create an innovation group, just like in a quality group, there's Six Sigma methods and lean methodologies, and there's formal ways to train and bring those seasoned tools into the organization and a quality department. Innovation is the same way. And design methods, having skilled, trained, educated designers is one of the core competencies that an innovation group should possess. As I mentioned earlier, and I have to say this, again, needs-based innovation is a critical, important way to be successful and generate the most value for your organization. We get locked up in healthcare with market-based innovation, and it leaves very few resources left over for needs-based innovation, and we have to figure out how to change the game a little bit there. We have to set aside or create more resourcing for needs-based innovation and not simply spend all of our money, in market-based innovation. Always focus on creating new value and the definition of innovation there. And lastly, it's highly affected by culture and communication. We can't forget that the organizational culture, if it's not optimistic and is not demonstrating things that reinforce we support innovation, we welcome new ideas, we support people who are taking risks. As soon as an organization does something that is the antithesis of that, it sends a huge message culturally to the organization and can have a big impact on the innovative attitude of an organization. So that's something that, and you may have experienced that within your organization. When I'm speaking with leaders at organizations, it's something that needs to be pointed out because it's so easy for organizations to shut down ideas or be resistant to new ideas and those types of things. And you just have to understand how visible that is to your innovation agenda. I will pause there for a second. That's my formal material for today. I just have a couple of wrap-up slides here as well, but before I get to those, I'd love to see if there's any comments or questions related to the material that I shared today. Hopefully you found it valuable and perhaps of interest to you, and I'd love to have any questions if you have more comments.
Thank you, Ryan. If you have a question, please feel free to add that to the questions section of the GoToWebinar. So Ryan, you talked a lot about healthcare or human-centered design today in healthcare. Where does that lead into, or how does that relate to UX design and actual designing of the product?
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. That's a great question. I've done a lot of work with UX design in the context of service design, and in doing that, and actually, pairing up service designers with UX designers, it really reveals the opportunity for UX to welcome in and benefit from a broader understanding of the service itself, the context within which that technology will exist. It can really supplement the design of that technology to be an even better fit and work more, frictionlessly within the context of that overall service. And then it brings that whole service experience together. Obviously, I'm referring to, technology experiences that are also put into context within some type of service experience. So if we can't pair up UX with service design, even UX design taking on some more of the tools of service design, spending more time in the field, spending more time, understanding a broader context of needs, can really help inform even greater and better, more valuable UX design.
Great, thank you. Is there, when you're setting up the space within your organization, we've heard of like innovation labs. Is there a requirement to have not only a dedicated department, but also a dedicated space for this?
Yeah, I think so. It's hard to do innovation work without the physical space to do that visual work. I'd say first, it's kind of a chicken and an egg, though. Don't get me wrong. I've seen organizations set up physical spaces without any professionals who actually have the skills to do that visual work. So they set up the space, kind of thinking the space is going to magically, give people the skills and the abilities to know how to use physical space to do work, and that doesn't happen that way. So it's kind of, you need one and the other. If you're going to bring in professionals who are fluent in their abilities to do that, you have to provide that physical environment and that space that enables them to use their skills and use their tools to generate that innovation that you're looking for. So it's a critically important piece. It can be really challenging. I've also seen organizations hire designers without the space or really the management skills to know how to manage design teams and really drive them effectively to deliver on the results and the promises that they can for organizations. So it can go the other way as well.
Great, thank you. And if someone wanted to learn some of these skills or access resources, where would be the best place to find those?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of different things that we talked about today. There's service design, there's human-centered design, and there's also kind of broad-based innovation. I'll focus more on the skills. You probably, are all aware that service design may be a little bit more foreign, certainly way more foreign than UX design, and probably less talked about than human-centered design. For the best place that I've went to learn more about service design has actually been Europe. I didn't physically go to Europe, but Europe has been doing service design, a decade or more longer than we have here in the country, maybe 20 years longer than we have here in the United States. So they have a number of service design consultancies. They have academic institutions who teach service design, and there's so many great case studies and examples of service design over there. So anything I can do, connect them with those organizations, those consultancies, white papers, that's where I learn the most about service design. Human-centered design, I mentioned earlier, IDO continues to be the leader in providing great access to educational resources related to human-centered design. And they're really easy to use. They're understandable, they're accessible. They do a great job of making it understandable for people who may not have a great familiarity with human-centered design. I use some of their materials to teach my graduate courses as well for that reason. So that's probably, and they offer a number of free educational experiences for people. I'd highly recommend those.
Thank you. At this time, we don't have any further questions for you, Ryan.
Great. I'll wrap up with a quick note here. I've been fortunate to be asked to come back again. So if you enjoyed this presentation, a totally different topic next month. I'm going to talk a little bit about the importance of empathetic caring in healthcare services. In this presentation, will be much different than the one today, with a similar theme, though, about the importance of needs-based innovation and where healthcare has actually went off the tracks, I think, for quite a long time, but has the opportunity to get back on it. And it is really through empathetic caring and designing that into the future of our healthcare services and healthcare experiences. And in this talk, I'll share a little bit more about what we learned with Harken Health, which was really a great model of what this could look like and what worked and what didn't work and what we learned. And so hopefully you'll take some time out of your schedule again next month to join me for that conversation.
Great. Thank you, Ryan, for presenting today. We will be recording this and making this available through the Minnesota HIMSS website. I hope everyone has a fabulous weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.